Every day, said the first soldier. There are more. When will they stop? The first soldier took the feet of the next corpse, and the second took the arms. Together they heaved the body into the pit. It was a natural ravine, shaded by the jungle canopy so the darkness inside almost hid the heap of bodies that had already built up at the bottom. The insects, fat and bloated on blood and decaying meat, hung in a cloud over the hole. Both soldiers wore full hazardous environment suits, decorated with the heraldry of House Cricks of Rebecca, to protect from the stench and infections carried by the insects. The first soldier was taller, with a long face and red hair visible through the suit's faceplate. The second was darker and powerfully built, with meaty arms and hands that made light work of stalking the ravine with fresh dead. There are only so many people in Rakaba, said the second soldier. They'll stop. When? When they run out, or when people learn. There was a good 30 bodies heaped up between the trees. They had been dumped there that morning, as evidenced by the vehicle tracks still glistening in the jungle mud. They were traitors to the Aristia. They were as varied as the living now who fought the invaders in the streets of Rakaba. Could be worse, I suppose, said the first soldier. Could be back in the city. Saints know what we might be turned into then. The two stooped and picked up another body. This one was a woman. How old do you think she is? Said the first soldier, looking at the relatively unblemished face. It was just possible to put aside the glassy eyes and thick bloodstain on the front of her dress and imagine what she looked like. Doesn't matter, said the second, and he hauled the body into the ravine by himself. He stood, arms out. What does any of this matter? Do you think it's happening on this planet? That's the problem, retorted the first soldier. No one knows. You've seen what they're turning us into back in the city. Do you know what they're saying about the people in charge? It's not the Aristia anymore. They're sorcerers and mutants. We don't know who we're fighting for. No one does. We fight because we fight, said the other soldier. That's the way it has always been. Every man has his place on Opus. Some fight, some work, some rule. We fight. We were born into it. When you question that, it all falls apart. That was why these people were executed. If it gets out of control, it's nothing but chaos. And those people who've been turned into something else, I saw them fighting at Daggerfall Park. They didn't even know their own names. They were walking bombs. Psychic bombs. What if that was us? Would you have been born for that too? You think the Imperium is any different? Once we stop fighting, they'll seal off the cities and virus bomb us. That's how they deal with anyone who doesn't kneel to the throne. The first soldier pointed at the second, the work of dumping bodies forgotten by the moment. Maybe it would be better to die than to live like those things in the city. Really? The second soldier drew his auto pistol from his holster. You can die right now if it's all the same to you. Just stand on the edge. I won't even have to bother throwing you in. He took aim at his fellow soldier's chest. The second soldier froze. The noise behind him had barely been enough to register, but it was enough. He looked slowly around. The figure in the jungle had been trying to conceal itself, but it was far too big to be completely hidden. That sound had come from branches breaking as it crept forwards, too big to be silent. Its armor was gold, streaked with mud, and it must have been 2 meters high, even half crouched in the foliage. In the shadows, a face stained with mud stared out, eyes narrowed. The second soldier aimed at the figure in the jungle. In the time it took to bring the weapon to bear, the armored man had lunged from his hiding place and dived into the soldier, tackling him to the ground and pinning him down in the mud. A massive armored hand grabbed the back of the suit's hood and ripped it open. His second hand grabbed the soldier by the face and snapped his head around, the sound of his spine coming apart with a sharp crack, like a distant gunshot. The first soldier fumbled with his own auto pistol. The catch on the holster was pinned close, to keep his gun slipping out as he worked. "Don't!" The soldier got the gun out. The armored man took a combat knife from his waist. In anyone else's hand, it would have been as long as a short sword. With a smooth motion, he drew and threw it, and the blade plunged through the soldier's sternum. The soldier took a couple of steps back, gun still in his hand, and fell backwards as his brain caught up with the fact that he was dead. Brother Golgithian waited in the sudden silence for more men to emerge from the jungle, but they didn't. He stood up, dropping the body of the soldier, whose neck he had just broken. He looked down at the heap of bodies they had been disposing of. From their conversation, he guessed that the dead had been executed by the forces of the Aristia. In the eyes of whatever ruled Opus through the Aristia, they were traitors and deserters. They had bullet wounds in the backs of their heads. Golgithian took the auto pistols from the dead soldiers and rifled to their pockets for extra ammunition. His own weapons had been lost when the Sanctifier crashed. Golgithian himself had been forced to crawl back from the wreckage. The cockpit crumpled around him, the fuel igniting as he struggled. He had left Kibriones in the wreckage, and his body had burned. At least he had been dead before that. Kibriones' gene seed was lost. However, the organ that regulated his many augmentations, and the symbol of the chapter's connection with their Primarch, and it would be greatly lamented that it had not been returned for implanting into new Space Marine. Through the jungle canopy were just visible the towers of Rokaba. Golgithian had only seen the city before the air. Its pale stone and red-tiled roofs leapt out from the jungle surrounding it, and the glistening ocean on which it sat. It was a place of antiquity and history, one of the historical power bases of Opus, and no doubt it was being torn apart by the Imperial invasion at that very moment. Golgithian knew that Lysander had a force of Imperial fists in there, somewhere, and that he had to get to them. On one of Golgithian's greaves was inscribed a crude map he had scratched, showing the location of the installation, whose defenses had shot down the Sanctifier. The Imperium didn't know it was there. Neither, judging by the destruction of the Aristia fighter plane, did the natives of Opus. And someone was most determined to keep its location secret. The jungle was darkening as the sun was dipping below green-covered hills. The noise of the jungle changed at night as the nocturnal creatures came out. Golgithian had seen prowling lizard-like creatures that were rather larger than a man and could climb the trees, and aerial hunters that looked like bundles of stinging tentacles trailing from a series of delicate sails. The soldiers here had left the previous day's work unfinished because they had been afraid to spend the night out here. Golgithian pulled the combat knife from the corpse of the soldier. "You don't know," he said to the body as the blade came free. "You're as blind as the rest of us. You're traitors, and you must be fought. We will not relent, but we will also discover what turned you into this, before more are turned from the light." No reply came from the dead soldier's mouth, which lolled open as Golgithian let the body flop back down to the mud. Then Golgithian turned into the outline of Rokaba, silhouetted in the silver-gold light of dusk, and began the rest of his journey to rejoin his brothers. The temperature of plains had given way to the cold of mountains. The air had dropped off quickly in oxygen levels, and temperature, as the squad ascended into an immediate layer of the atmosphere, for the richest air clung tightly to Opus's surface, as if afraid it would dissipate into space. A space marine's lungs could cope easily enough, and his hyperoxygenated blood was more up to the task to keeping altitude sickness at bay. The cold did not bother him either, for the same systems kept his extremities safe from numbness or frostbite. There was something still inhospitable about those ridges of reddish-black stone, the peaks and valleys, like a great stony scab covering a wound on the planet's surface. It was less easy for Scout Sergeant Orphos to put his finger on just why it was such an unfriendly landscape in which to hunt, but its menace was still there. The King of Crows must have been desperate indeed to flee through here. Orphos had followed a trail that consisted mostly of the dead, members of the plague procession who had broken limbs in falls or succumbed to the conditions and been left to die. They had no sign of any plague upon them. Indeed, many had the manicured nails and fine teeth of the Aristia. A few even had jewelry they could not bear to part with. Orphos had been right. Someone powerful and dangerous had escaped Imperial forces via the Emperor's Embrace refugee camp, and the Aristia were helping him do it. At that moment, Orphos lay on the reversed edge of a ridge that formed the part of a downward slope of the last mountain his squad had negotiated. The mountain fell away below into a deep valley in which the ice had not thawed from that winter. Perhaps it had never thawed down there, where the sun could not quite reach. He scanned for movement, letting the superior peripheral vision of a space marine cover the whole valley. "Anything?" Orphos asked. The surface of the rock beside Orphos shifted, revealing the face of Scout Inarin, where it had been hidden by the chameleon cloak laying over him. Inarin wore a magnocular visor, which let him focus on specific areas as Orphos scanned the whole valley. "There's another body down there," he said. "Robed, like the procession. Decent boots, though." "They are shedding members more quickly," said Orphos. "How many is your count?" "They have lost 12, said Inarin. "They have 9 left." "My kind of fight," came Grace's voice over the squad's vox link. Instinctively, Orphos looked across the valley to a bank of loose, flinty shards, clinging to the opposite side, where he knew Grace was concealed. "We can let the enemy kill themselves." "My kind of fight is one where we take the enemy alive before anything can do for them," replied Orphos. "I want the King of Crows, brothers, and I do not mean as a trophy to take back to the Wings of Thorn." A long, low sound raked across the mountain peaks, changing pitch as it approached. A flight of 2 Imperial Navy fighters ripped across the sky overhead, leaving white contrails against the vivid, cold sky. "If Chikapov thinks the enemy are using the mountain passes, he'll bomb them," said Orphos. "We might never find the king." "If there's a King of Crows to find," said Grace. "You believe there isn't?" said Orphos. "I believe," replied Grace, "we should not be surprised if we are just trailing a band of refugees fleeing from the camp." "You certainly gave them enough to flee from, brother," said Orphos. "Refugees with electus that cost more than a commoner's worth," said Inarin, "and Xenos hide hiking boots." If he intended any humor or sarcasm, it did not touch the inflection of his word. "We're clear to the front," Vox Fontrez from down the valley. He too was invisible to the naked eye, concealed among the boulders deposited among the valley bed by glaciers an age ago. "Move up," said Orphos. "No silhouettes. Inarin, watch behind us." Orphos kept his cloak wrapped tight, his brown and gray colors shifting to mimic the pattern of the stone around him. Inarin snapped his visor up and shouldered a sniper rifle, walking carefully backwards to keep watch on the rear. The squad moved down the valley, Orphos keeping them moving quickly. Even though they moved as quietly as they could, Orphos winced at the sound of stones falling down the valley side as they walked. He saw Ventress up ahead, moving between fallen boulders, keeping ahead of them. Orphos felt the blast a moment before he heard it, and his muscle memory was already throwing himself down the slope without thinking. The side of the valley just ahead erupted in a great reaching claw of darkness, the concussion slamming against him. Orphos tumbled, deaf and blind, sharp rocks lashing at him as he tumbled down the slope. He fought the ringing in his ears. A deep rumble reached through the rock, and Orphos knew the side of the valley was coming down. The soldier's instinct, both sleep-taught and hammered into him by the battlefield, took over, and he was running. Rocks fell on a tide of shattered scree that flowed like brown liquid down the valley. Orphos was scrambling away from the collapse, and more by instinct than choice, he grabbed a handful of Anaran's cloak and dragged the scout behind him. The collapse was knee-deep when it was spent. A thick plume of smoke and dust rolled over it, and the valley darkened as if the sun had gone down. "Report!" shouted Orphos. "Report! I am unhurt," said Anaran beside him. "And I, Sergeant," voxed Grace. "Prevar," voxed Orphos. "Ventress!" The shape of Scout Prevar emerged from the swirling darkness, clutching his left arm. "A broken humerus, Sergeant," he said. "Nothing more." Orphos saw Prevar was dark gray from head to toe, with dust and grime from the explosion. "It's an ambush," said Orphos. "Be ready, brothers. Eyes everywhere. Ventress, report, brother." Grace half slid down the intact slope and ran to where Ventress had been, which was now deep in pulverized rock. Orphos drew his bolt pistol and scanned the valley ridges. How in the hells did they get around us? They knew we were here. All the way, they knew. The first gunshot fell among them before the dust had cleared enough for a decent aim. A bullet pinged among the rocks, followed a second later by the report from high up. "I am on it," said Anaran, rolling into his front with his rifle in front of him. Orphos ran up the slope, towards the source of the shot, keeping low, using the folds and breaks in the rock for cover. He wiped a hand over his eyes to get the worst of the grime out. He half spotted movement in the ridge above, and the corresponding shot from Anaran's rifle. He could not tell if his fellow scout had hit anything. Grace was still below, digging with his hands in the loose stone. He couldn't see Prevar among the falling masses of dirt. Orphos could see more clearly now. Nothing above him. The top of the ridge was a short sprint away. He put his head down and ran. The doctrines of the Space Marines taught that a battle brother was safer the closer he was to the enemy, where his greatest strength, his training, his force of will counted the most. A Space Marine was not trained to be a speck on someone else's gun sight. Orphos reached the ridge. He dropped to his belly. The ridge looked like a great tumult of upheaval, where thousands of years ago pressures in the planet's crust had formed jagged spikes that stuck up in every direction. A pathless mess of mountain, which looked like it never ended. Right in front of him, from the reverse slope of the ridge, lurched a human form, swathed in plague-stained rags. Orphos seized it up in a second. Its head and upper torso were horribly swollen, forming a single necklace lump, giving it an awful top-heavy outline. Asymmetrical eyes rolled through the tears and the green-black rags, and one clawed hand, wrapped in sodden grayish flesh, was that of a drowned man, was a long-barreled autogun. He used a snipe at the scout squad. Orphos blew a fist-sized hole in the mutant at point-blank range with his bolt pistol. The exit wound, rather larger, was a fountain of grayish flesh erupting from the mutant's back. The mutant's upper torso split open like the egg sac of a giant spider. Segmented limbs unfolded in a shower of colorless, lumpy gore that splattered down over Orphos. Each limb ended in a blade. Not a talon, but a blade. A knife or a piece of hammered metal, forced in the split end of each limb, and tied like a primitive spear. Orphos ducked as the mutant slashed at him. His combat knife slashed over his head and took off a limb. The limb thrashed and sprayed blood like a water hose. Orphos dived into the mutant, tackling to the ground, forcing his weight down onto it. It reached up at him, one blade carving a long line of pain across his face, and another punching into the flesh of his upper arm. Orphos had the bolt pistol barrel up under what remained of the mutant's ribs. He blew another 2 holes in it, even as an eye rolled up to stare at him from the innards crowding its sundered chest. "Whatever you are," snarled Orphos, forcing his knife up the mutant's grip, "I am the last thing you see." He rammed the knife down to the massive organs. There had to be something in there it could not do without. He tore the blade out, and again plunged. Again and again, each time a fibrous wreck of tissue and bone was thrown out. The mutant stopped moving, save for a few hindbrain spasms that kept its limbs twitching. "Brothers!" Orphos grasped into the Vach. "Eyes about us! There will be more!" He kicked himself free of the mutant's wrecked body. He looked down to the smoke-choked valley. Inarn and Prevar were emerging from the smoke and running up the slope. Grayus was behind them, covered in grime and smoke dust. "Ventress?" voxed Orphos. "We should have raised that camp," yelled Grayus. "We should have killed the damn lot of them. I'd have lined them up myself." "Brother, focus," said Orphos. "We are beset by enemies. Enemies we could have killed days ago. What cost would a camp full of scum have been? To kill the traitors among them." He pointed at the 2 naval fighter bombers just visible over the opposite ridge as they made a return pass. "One payload from a bomber, and these filth would have been burned to dust." "You forget why we are here," snapped Orphos. "Even in the claws of wickedness, we fight for the humanity that bore us." Orphos' eyes did not leave the pair of fighter bombers. Something about their path caught his attention and would not let go. One spiraled off path. It fell, caught in a flat spin, dropping out of view as sparks showered from the control surfaces of its wings. The other kept on course, ignoring the loss of his twin. A few seconds later, the sound of the first fighter's crash reached Orphos' ears, a rumbling, shattering boom in the distance. "Scatter!" yelled Orphos. "Scatter! Strike incoming!" The fighter bombers were compromised. One of the pilots had survived the attempt to take his craft over. Perhaps. Of the pair of pilot and co-pilot, only one was traitor, and in their struggle, it had thrown the fighter bomber into a spin, from which it would not recover. The other had been taken over cleanly. The many scenarios that flashed through Orphos' head all ended in one fighter lost and one compromised. Its mission to wipe out the scouts tracking the pilot's fellow traitors through the mountains. Orphos leapt over the crest of the ridge, leaving the mutant's torn corpse where it lay, and slid down the scree slope in one hip. Inarn and Prevar were not far behind. Prevar slipped and fell, rolling over in and yelling as his broken arm was forced out of shape. Orphos was on his feet and running. A cleft in the rock ahead formed an entrance to a pitch-black cave. It was impossible to tell how far it went, or whether a Space Marine scout could force his body all the way in, but it was the only shelter anywhere near. He looked back. Grayus was silhouetted at the top of the ridge as the fighter boomed over, dangerously low, fast and straight as an arrow. A shower of black specks fell from it into the valley. Cluster munitions. 100 bomblets detonated at once. The valley exploded into flame. Grayus was lit up and thrown off his feet, hurled off the ridge down the slope. The valley shook a wave of darkness. Orphos dived into the cave, the 2 other scouts close behind him. Rogue bomblets were falling everywhere. sharp cracks bursting somewhere overhead, each followed by a shaking like an earthquake. The sound of the mountains themselves complaining, a terrible sound creaking and cracking from far below, shuddering the ground. Orphos could see Anarin and Privar in the entrance behind him, Greyas scrambling down the slope, as debris rained down as thick as a blizzard. Behind Privar, tucked up against the opening in the rock, was a body. It was human, wrapped in the same robes as the King of Crows and his cohorts had worn since they escaped the Emperor's embrace. His feet were bloody and torn, wrapped only in red-soaked bandages. A single bullet wound glinted in the back of its head. "There!" said Orphos, over the pattering of stone on stone from outside. "A straggler! He was slowing them down. They executed him, and the blood is not yet dry. They went this way." Greyas made it into the cave. His face was streaming with blood from the wounds on his scalp caused by the falling shards of stone. "He's gone," said Greyas. "Those sons of dogs, Ventress is gone. I couldn't find him." "Focus, brother, and avenge him," said Orphos. "We cannot pause to pay our respects now. Remove with me." The cave spiraled out in the mountain, cramped, wet, and pitch black. Chill wind howled through them, as if through the pipes of a flute. Orphos moved as fast as he could, shouldering through the confines, almost too cramped for a hunched-over human, let alone a space marine. Ventress was dead. Nothing could change that now, but the mission could still succeed. The King of Crows could still be brought in, alive, and the truth about the war in Opus could be wrestled from him. Orphos told himself this as he stepped knee-deep in the freezing water. An underground stream rushed through the heart of the mountain. Light strobed, gunfire hammered out, echoing against the walls of the many-chambered cavern that opened up above the scout squad. Orphos half-glimpsed ragged figures with autoguns aimed down at him and opened fire, shooting down with a burst of bolt pistol fire. Another was lost in the shadows. The scouts splashed up past him. "You take one, brother. You must take us all," yelled Greyas, and rattled off half of a magazine at the shelves of the dripping rock. A grenade splashed into the water. Orphos dived against one wall, and stone showered against him, opening up cuts in his face and hands. There was nothing that would slow him down. A mutant lurched up from the water, its form skeletal, and its face wrapped in dripping muscle, its hands talons. Orphos picked it up, folded it backwards, felt its spine come apart, and rammed it down to the stone floor. Its skull crunched, and it fell still. A chain blade whirled. In the darkness, Orphos could gauge its location, arrowing towards Anarin, but Anarin turned the blade aside with the body of a sniper rifle, and threw a crunching elbow into the ribs of the attacker. Orphos barely glimpsed scaled skin and bony spines as Anarin slid a combat knife up the mutant's chest, and carved it open from navel to neck. Privar was backed up against one wall, peering into the shadows overhead, looking for targets. "Onwards!" yelled Orphos. "They want us trapped down here. Onwards! Bring the fight to them!" Gunfire splattered down. Impacts cracked off the back of Orphos' scout squad. Up ahead, groping almost blindly, he found a cleft through which the stream was rushing. Chest deep now, he followed it under darkness. Even a space marine's eyes could not see. Greyas was still firing, and Orphos could tell it was at random. "Greyas, follow!" shouted Orphos. "Anarin, bring him! Bring him!" Greyas swore and fought as Anarin almost dragged him into the darkness. The sound of the rushing water was louder here, and Orphos fancied that more than one stream converged into the freezing waters that swirled up into the shoulders. Light glimmered ahead, catching the foaming water. Orphos could see sky through a crack in the rock. The mutants had been posted here to slow down the scouts, in case the traitors and the fighter bombers failed to kill them. They were protecting something. That something was the King of Crows. Orphos knew it. He had to push on. He had to pursue. He knew he was close. The desperation in the enemy's tactics was obvious now. They were throwing their lives away to buy time for the king to escape. But there was not enough time to escape an Imperial fist when he had an enemy scent. Orphos lost his footing in the slippery rock. He tumbled out into the light on a rushing tide. He rolled into his front and saw the underground river emerge into a rocky ledge overlooking the endless expanse of mountains, as if the land itself had been torn up by a giant hand. The water spilled fast and shallow over the ledge into a waterfall that plunged out of view. One of the ragged plague victims was waiting for the scouts. Orphos' hand was quicker. His bolt pistol was up, and he had just enough time to recognize the fatigues, webbing, and body armor of an elite Aristia household trooper before he put 2 rounds into the soldier's chest. The soldier took a couple of steps back and then fell over the edge, off the ledge and out of sight. Orphos glanced left and right. He saw movement to his left, where the remainder of the plague procession was hurrying out of sight. Orphos ran after them, splashing through the water and fighting to stay on his feet. He backed up against an outcrop of rock and checked his bolt pistol's load. He had 2 shells left in the magazine. He took out a new magazine to swap it in. Before it could reload, a shadow fell over him. It was a horror in tattered skin, wings spreading. Tentacles hung from its chest and abdomen, snaring over Orphos' face and neck as it gilded over him. Orphos was on his back in the water before he could think, head bound, unable to breathe. His pistol was out of his hand as he grabbed the tentacles wrapping around his face. He turned over, feeling them bunch up and entwine with all the strength that had torn them free. He heard a scream. The freezing water was suddenly warm for a moment as blood poured out of the thing's torn chest. Orphos was out of the water, gasping down a desperate breath. He saw the mutant rearing up over him. Its wings were stretched across bony spines, spreading from its back. Its skin was slimy gray-black, and its face was split in 2 by a vertical mouth. It had 3 eyes, one at the center of its forehead, a red spine without a pupil. Its chest and stomach were a ruined mess, the stumps of its snaring tentacles oozing gore. Bony blades speared out from its elbows, dark with long dried blood. Orphos leapt on it, knocking it back with his weight. He grabbed one wing and wrenched on it, feeling the spines break and the membrane of its skin tearing. He dropped to one knee, grabbing a wrist and ankle, and lifted the winged mutant out of the water. He spun and let go, hurtling the thing off the edge of the waterfall. Its good wing tried to flap, to keep it aloft, but it could do nothing but spin as it fell over the waterfall. Orphos could hear it shrieking, like a bird of prey with a victim in sight, the sound falling away with it. Orphos was aware of Grace and Anaran struggling off the edge through the freezing torrent, but Orphos was too close now. He couldn't pause, not when the King of Crows had thrown so much into stopping him here. Orphos jumped over the rock and saw on a narrow path winding off the mountainside the King of Crows. Orphos had not known what he would see when he came face to face with the King of Crows. He could not stop various images pressing their way into his imagination. A towering being with a crown of black feathers, a man without a face or form, a regal man enrobed and dripping with gold. But he forced them all out and left his mind open, so he would not be led astray by preconception about what the King of Crows actually was. Even so, it was no surprise at all to be looking in the face of Lord Speaker Castellan von Sephoris. Orphos had last seen that meaty, finely bred face on the picked broadcast Vel Sopranus had sent to the Imperial forces. Now he was without his periwig or the robes of a Lord Speaker of the Aristia, and wore the drab fatigues of a household soldier, but it was unmistakably the same man. He even had the translator with him, the mousy scrap of a woman, crouching behind him like a whipped dog. Even on the run, forced to escape and crawl like a rat through the Emperor's embrace camp, Velsofranus had not been willing to give up the one luxury, his translator, that marked him out as a living in a different world to the masses of Opus. Velsofranus, the King of Crows, froze as he realized he was face to face with Orphos. Velsofranus was a large man, but Orphos was far taller. And though he did not have his bolt pistol with him, the combat knife that Orphos drew was more than enough to slice the speaker of the Aristia clean in two. "You need not die," said Orphos. "You need not even suffer. Give yourself to the Imperial fists. It is over." And possibly Velsofranus smiled. "You really know nothing, do you?" he said. He used Low Gothic instead of the Aristia's own language. "What does suffering mean to me? What does death mean? When I have seen what I have seen." Orphos took a step closer. "Lord Speaker, it is over." "It was over before you got here," came the reply. "When you walk into the hell they have prepared, it will be over for you as well." "Who are they?" said Orphos. "Who rules Opus, if not the King of Crows? Who has done this to your world?" Velsofranus laughed, and Orphos knew it was a cover for something. Velsofranus was drawing a weapon from the webbing of his fatigues. Orphos recognized the shape of a plasma pistol before it was out, and he weighed up the distance between him and Velsofranus. A space ring with a combat blade could lunge and kill, creating a long, lethal distance, but Velsofranus was a step or two far away. Orphos would be shot before he stuck home. Orphos jumped back, rolling over the rock behind which he had taken cover only a few moments before. The first plasma shot boiled away. Half the rock, Orphos was forced back by the wave of superheated air. He hit the water. There was gunfire all around. Orphos realized that Prevar and Graeus were swapping gunfire with troopers on the other side of the ridge. Anaran was wrestling with something down in the foam. Velsofranus was aiming at Orphos, the plasma pistol in his hand glowing as its power coil recharged. Orphos plunged his hand into the water. It closed on the butt of his bolt pistol. It had 2 shots left. Orphos needed only 1. Orphos aimed and fired, and blew the upper half of Velsofranus' head off. Orphos turned and saw Anaran slitting the throat of the trooper he was wrestling with. Another was stumbling back, chest blown open by Privar's pistol. Graeus had the last of them in a headlock, and Orphos could hear the wrenching snap as he broke the soldier's neck. The only sound was the rushing of the waterfall and the wind through the mountains. Velsofranus' body was still upright. Everything above his upper jaw was gone. "That's the King of Crows?" said Graeus. "It was," said Orphos, approaching the body carefully. There was nothing to say to Velsofranus. Wasn't a mutant himself, one who has kept his brain somewhere other than his skull. A prickling on the back of his neck was all the warning Orphos had, and it wasn't nearly enough. The shot whistled past him. The pain hit a moment before he heard the report of the shot from behind him, echoing up the mountains. The pain was a hammer against his senses. He reeled and almost fell back. He raised his hand to steady himself against the half-melted rock, but no hand came up. Orphos' right arm had been blown out the elbow. Splinters of bone stuck out of the gory mess of the stump. The shot had gone through Graeus first. It had punched through the scout's mid, said Anaran, putting Orphos' remaining arm over his shoulder. "You will live. We are victorious." As Orphos passed out, the last thing he saw was the pure cold sky as it spun above him.